All right, Clay. So, the word moist, it's a joke on the internet.
Yeah.
Is do you actually is this one of those internet things that it only actually happens on the internet, or do you know anybody physical wise in person, I suppose would be the way to say that, who actually has a tendency to be offended by the word
people?
moist? Do you know?
Oh, offended by the word moist.
Do you know any physical real life people? I know this thing pops up on the internet, but it seems to me like a lot of things that it only exists on the internet. I don't know if there's a TV show that originated that as a joke where it's like, oh, don't say moist. It's a strange thing to say.
It is kind of gross. I mean, I kind of get it, but it definitely has.
It's a sexual connotation, right? Is that why people do it? It's not just that things are damp. It's that there's like a sexual thing going on with it.
I think it's just the sound of it in all, because of that connotation, and also in general, it's just a strange kind of gooey sounding word. Like my friend Dan, who's been on the show before, really doesn't like the word focaccia. Not really sure why, but he just thinks it's an awful word. It's no comment on the bread itself.
Have you ever seen the Monty Python sketch about the tinny words and the woody words?
I probably have. I don't remember.
It's typical. It's just like this aristocratic British family sitting around saying different words, and the patriarch of the family, like, he enjoys the sound of what he calls woody words and he hates tinny words. So he likes words like gourd. He's like, that's a good woody word, gourd. And he hates words like tinsel and stuff like that. It says it irritates him to hear the word tinsel.
From what I understand about Monty Python, and they've said this specifically, is most of their jokes were just them opening a thesaurus and just picking words.
Yeah.
So, which I really appreciate, because I'm a big fan of word-based humor.
We're going to be talking about moist vessel. Sorry for anyone who's offended by the word moist. We haven't really cracked whether or not this is an internet thing, but let us know in the comments below if you think it is. And maybe we should start plugging stuff at the start of this, just in case people tune out. But we have a Patreon. If you want to go to patreon.com/thepenskypal.
We have brain pills we're going to start selling.
I have supplements. I have Joe Rogan supplements.
Vitamin supplements that'll really get, your brain working and
your vagina moist. So let's
it'll make your brain moist, and it'll make your moist more brainy.
You can go to patreon.com/thepenskypal if you've enjoyed these 2 minutes of content you've heard so far. We'll plug it again at the end. Anyway, let's talk about moist vessel. We'll take a break. We'll play a clip from the episode. We'll come back and we'll break it down.
Whoa, another conference room meeting? Shocker. You guys debating the Prime Directive again? Pretty fascinating stuff. No laughing. I was making fun of you, not with you.
Well, since you're one of us now, I guess you're making fun of yourself.
What?
Ensign Beckett Mariner?
No.
I am pleased to grant you a promotion.
No.
Congratulations, Lieutenant Mariner.
Lieutenant?
Looking forward to serving with you for a long, long time.
All right, so Moist Vessel is the 4th episode of the 1st season of Star Trek Lower Decks. It came out on CBS All Access on the 27th of August, 2020. Written by Ann Kim, directed by Barry J. Kelly. In-universe date is 2380-57538.9 is the star date. In this episode, Captain Freeman seeks the ultimate payback after Mariner blatantly disrespects her in front of the crew. A well-meaning Tendi accidentally messes up a lieutenant's attempt at spiritual ascension and tries to make it right. What do you think? What do you think about that? Is there anywhere you particularly wanted to start with this one? Yeah. I have a overriding theme, but why don't you start?
I guess mine is technically overriding as well, which is this is the 4th episode, so this is we've watched as many as the critics have watched. I don't get the hate. I thought this was a good episode. I think it's still. Did you not?
It was my least favorite out of all of them so far.
I really enjoyed the A plot quite a bit. I think the Tendi stuff was a little thin. But as a straight Star Trek plot, I thought finding a ship with the emulsion that causes this organic growth, I thought that was really
terraforming.
Cool.
Liquid terraforming or whatever they call it.
Terraforming emulsion or something. I thought that was a good Star Trek plot. It's only 20 minutes or so you you don't get time to sit with it the way that you do on a longer show. They kind of snap their fingers. That's the one thing they've done in every episode so far is once they find the cure, or the fix, it's like a finger snap and everything goes back to normal.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, just unfortunately how the show, I mean, it's not like they're going to be flying around for the rest of the season with rocks growing in the holodeck or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I like the stuff with Mariner and shit. What the hell's the captain's name? Freeman. I like the stuff there. I liked the stuff with Mariner having to do all the mundane jobs of a lieutenant. I thought that was fun. I think the weakest thing for me was I thought it was pretty funny too. I laughed quite a bit at it. I thought the Tendi stuff was the weakest part of it.
You can start there.
What's that?
We can start there because
Sure.
I didn't really like the Tendi storyline, mostly because, well, I think that they've established her as kind of a, well, I guess that's the question. To me, she's the least well-defined out of all the characters to this
Sure.
point. Like, I don't really get what her tick is, and I suppose looking back on it, and you kind of realize it halfway through that she's desperate for friends, I suppose, but her characterization to me doesn't really match what they've given her as a personality trait to have. So she doesn't seem like the kind of character who would not have friends on the ship. There's nothing strange about her to the point where you're like, oh.
I don't think it's that she doesn't have friends. I think it's that she just is desperate for everyone to like her.
Okay.
Which I don't think the stuff that you're saying isn't true if just for that switch, because it is something that hasn't really come up, because my interpretation of Tendi to this point has been someone who is very, very interested and very engaged by just knowing stuff and like the newness of stuff, which is why she gets so excited about the Ascension, why she got so excited about seeing the pulsar thing when they were watching it in the Jeffries tube together. Like that came across. But yeah, I thought the lead in for this wasn't super. It didn't line up with her character for me. The way that she goes to this Ascension thing and is not paying attention, and then clumsily kicks over this thing. It did lead to a joke I really liked, which was room temperature
sand. Yeah,
that was good.
I think
she's just that whole section of the story just didn't really work for me.
She's
except for the Ascension itself at the end. The
Ascension itself is my favorite part of the entire episode, and I wish that the show did more with it, but we can get to that, I suppose. I thought this was clearly the weakest script out of everything that they've seen so far. It felt to me the most like it was a situation where they had a sequence and then they were just like, we're just going to change this really quickly to move it into something else. So it felt the most like it never settled into anything. And I was disappointed in that because I thought you could either spend an entire episode with what it's like for Mariner to have to be a senior officer, right? I thought that could easily support 15 minutes of a story in this episode. I thought you could do the Ascension thing for an entire episode. I thought that they underwhelmingly portrayed the ship turning into an organic creature. I thought that didn't get anything out of it, really. Like, it happens and you see the animation and it gives them a sequence where they're kind of like running through a faux jungle at that point. But it was like, it just felt to me that they took a lot of stories that you could have done something with and they threw them all into the same script. And it moved so quickly from each of them that I felt underwhelmed by every single direction that they took with those plot points of those stories.
Yeah, the one, I liked that. I don't disagree. I liked that the catalyst for the emulsion stuff getting out of control was directly relatable to actions that the captain took, or at least her arrogance anyway. And then the other captain tried to one-up her.
Yeah.
But I was actually expecting more from Boimler in this one. I thought he was going to be the one to cause the thing to break down, because his whole thing was like, oh, well, they seem to reward doing bad things, so I'll just have to find a bad thing. So I thought he
spills coffee, and all he does is spill coffee on the guy, and that's what I'm it's like they're underserving that joke in that way. Like you could build a whole episode around Boimler being like, saying he's going to pull a George Costanza and do the opposite, because that seems to be the thing that works for people, and it not working out for him. So I was distracted by it, because to this point I felt all the previous episodes have had a solid backbone of a story going the entire thing, and you could easily track what it was. And here it felt really like there was a lot of ideas being thrown into the pot.
Yeah, it definitely didn't have the through line that the other ones have had. Because I was expecting Boimler to like go to, when he goes to his bridge job, do something like absentmindedly or on purposely absentmindedly lean on the tractor beam thing, and that was what caused everything. But yeah, he just sort of disappears, and they do that one coffee bit, and it doesn't really amount to anything. Yeah, it's too bad they didn't go that way, because they set it up so clearly, having this contrast between him and Mariner about her getting promoted for her getting everything he wants for, and not
the wrong reasons. Yeah,
for the wrong reasons. Yeah, and they come back to it at the end, but it never feels like it never feels like that was the point of the story. Yeah,
no, it's not.
They do, because the emulsion thing is really cool. The stuff they do with the mom and Mariner I liked, but yeah, it's not really, well, I don't know. I guess technically, it's more the thing that kind of that makes the through line feel a little bit slight is because maybe it's because we're so used to Boimler being part of the through line, and this one he's not at all, but he's still kind of positioned to be. Mm-hmm. And the through line is actually Mariner and Freeman.
Yeah. Well, you could. I think it continues. Another problem is that they're not really mixing up the character pairings at this point. Like they're not putting Rutherford with anyone but Tendi, and it's Mariner and Boimler together. So when Boimler has a tangential story to Mariner, you expect that he's going to interact with her a little bit more. And I wanted that to happen, because I do like the idea of he takes the wrong impression from her promotion and goes about things the wrong way to try to do the same thing. They felt like it's a perfect place to go with it. Instead what they did is they focus on the Freeman and Mariner thing, which I think this is the first time they've mentioned it since the pilot that they're related. And she calls her mom for the first time, which I don't think has ever happened before on this show. And I guess it depends on where you think the comedy is going to come from here, or like how closely this needs to be a TNG thing, where they try to pay off the Captain and Mariner thing by having them come to a kind of understanding towards the end of this episode. It's a little bit similar to the Ransom and Mariner thing that they did in the one where he gets in the fist fight with the giant alien, where they come to an understanding, and then there's a joke to button it where they're not totally at an understanding, like they're at odds still. I think I prefer the comedy here to come from the angle of the ascension bit, which is this really dark, twisted spin on a Star Trek thing where he's ascending, and it's painful, and he sees like bizarre, surreal stuff that doesn't make any sense, and he's talking about it, but it clearly looks like he's being sucked into this show's version of like the Event Horizon hellscape that he's going to, and the character's not sure how to react to it. I don't find the characters' touching moments to be all that touching. Really, I don't feel there's a pathos here where I feel that the characters like Mariner and the Captain getting along with each other is like, oh, that's a nice touching moment. It feels to me like it's almost a betrayal of the comedy aspect of the show that I would prefer. It's just like I don't know if this show has the heart at this point to really convince me that scenes like that are something worth building to across an entire plot line.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, do you think that's because they've done so? I mean, they're doing that stuff so quickly as opposed to taking some more time before they get to that stuff?
No, I think it's them trying to not stray too far from the Star Trek philosophy, which is that there has to be a glimmer of happiness in here somehow. And because the relationship is completely played for jokes between the Captain and Mariner, they're resolving the problem feels a little bit artificial to me. Like it never feels like it. The tension between the characters is what feels natural to me in this show. So when they start to turn it around and say, oh, I can actually relate to you in some way, it feels forced and fake. It doesn't feel like these characters really feel this way. It's just that the way that they want to move the story. And then they always flip it at the end. I just don't think that the flip is not funny enough to justify the entire journey that you spend getting to that point. It's always just this little button at the end. And I just prefer I would prefer the Seinfeld no hugging, no lessons approach to this, which is just a much darker playing around with ideas like the ascension thing, which I really liked and I really enjoyed that. And I even like the emulsion ship. I think that's kind of a cool idea that they don't do enough with. But I want more comedy to come from those areas and maybe less from pretending like these characters are actually people, you know?
Okay. Yeah, so just robots on the show is what you want?
Yeah, exactly. I want aluminum. I want marbles clanging around. More Rutherford.
More Rutherford, but only the robot side of his face.
Well, that's because I see criticism of the show where the characters are not acting in a way that is acceptable in a Star Trek universe, right? Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, the show exists outside of that Star Trek universe. So like you can't hold these characters to that standard. And because of that, I think that them learning a lesson together doesn't really feel like it's the appropriate angle to take with them, because it just doesn't feel earned. It doesn't feel like it's a part of this universe and these characters to feel something that's like legitimate or positive in some way.
I don't think I would agree with that, because I think up to this point, they've made it clear that there's a heart baked into the show. Because all the characters have had moments where they've had more heartwarming moments with each other to varying degrees. And I think if you did this whole story with Mariner and Freeman and they just don't grow or they don't change, even if it's just to change back, then I think it's just going to be kind of boring. And how far does that joke really get you? Because the part of the story is that Freeman is essentially underestimating Mariner and thinks that she doesn't care and thinks that she doesn't pay attention, and then they get into a situation where their relationship is expanded on a little bit, and there's a glimmer of understanding, which ultimately goes back to them butting heads at the end. And so I don't really feel like it's a betrayal of anything, because I think you have to.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think you have to. If you're gonna put those two characters together, you have to address that stuff because of who they are, because they're mother and daughter, and because the setup of the story is that clearly they're butting heads about Mariner being there and how Mariner approaches stuff. So there has to be some sort of movement in one direction or the other.
Are those characters ever going to change from that relationship? Is there any real growth that's going to happen here, or is this just a emotional scene that's being added in as a payoff, as a lead into a joke that's the payoff of none of this actually changes?
I think it's probably not going to change too much. But I think that's an element of just the way that they're telling stories. I think with episodic TV like this, part of what you do is you kind of reset everything at the end. Yep. So, like if I think
Arrested Development does something similar to this. Arrested Development does a lot of storylines where there's a moment of bonding before it all becomes undone as the joke that does it. Like Michael and Job will have a moment of like, the narrator would be like, the two brothers bonded for a minute. But then there will be something that betrays that shows that it's a fraudulent relationship that's actually happening. Like Job will have done something that then explodes at that moment, and it reveals like the true relationship that's between those two characters. Sure. But Arrested Development does it funnier, I think, because Arrested Development is setting it up effectively as the joke there, where they know that none of this is real. They know that this is not the relationship that this family has.
Sure.
So it's kind of playing off the naivete of the characters in a way that they are falling for this joke that then blows up in their face. Here, I think it's different. I think that the joke that undercuts it at the end is not effective enough, and it only feels like it's a button to flip the status quo back to what it needs to be by the end of it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they probably could have done something more clever than just a callback to the yawning thing, because I didn't particularly like the yawning thing at the beginning. It seemed like it was a little bit, it seemed kind of lazy to me.
Yeah.
And as a button to bring it back, I think it might be more. I think it might have been. I think it might have been more beneficial if it was like whatever they did to solve the problem after they've gotten their awards. Something Mariner did to fix things malfunction, like you're saying, malfunctions and breaks something either even further or causes more damage or something like that. Yeah, so I can see what you're saying, but I do think that putting those two characters together, because I think Arrested Development and Seinfeld are kind of unfair comparisons because both of those shows are incredibly cynical, whereas this is not to this point. It's a fairly hopeful show. All your characters mostly end on upswings, emotional upswings and character upswings. So it feels a little weird to do something that cynical,
except for the ascension thing, which is why I like the ascension bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But so I think there's probably room for a better joke, but I don't particularly mind what they did with the two of them as far as how they get to the end there, because I think I like the fact that they spent some time together and that they had some, because I wouldn't say that they end up like on the same page or anything by that point. They have a little bit more understanding.
Captain and Mariner.
Yes,
yeah.
They have a little bit more understanding of each other, but I wouldn't say they're nearly on the same. It's the thing that I do like about the end bit is that you kind of get it's less something going wrong and Freeman getting so mad that she busts her back down to ensign than it is Mariner actively choosing not to want to be like Freeman actually is coming into it thinking that we have gotten past this. Now she is a lieutenant. Now she is gonna, keep her shit together. And Mariner's actively choosing not to do that.
Yeah,
it's like when you finally get the clothes on your kid to take him to church, and then as soon as they get in the car, they just start pulling everything off.
Yeah, I think a good comparison between them. I think that the Ascension plotline actually kind of plays off against it in a way that I find preferable to it. So, well, I think they're kind of unfair because the Ascension storyline features a lieutenant that you've never seen before, and you don't need to see him again, so they have freedom there. Whereas Mariner and Freeman have to kind of they're going to be on the show continuing with each other, so they have to kind of go back to the status quo. But the Ascension plotline works for me as a comedy better because the build up there feels natural to those characters in a way that, like, Tendi, even though she's kind of underdefined, I think that Tendi eventually starts to make sense as to what she wants this guy to do and why he's hesitant to like want her help and what it all means. But the joke, the cruel twist of the joke is that the end result that they're both striving for is not what either of them wants. So right. I just think that I find that much more comical than I think the Captain and Mariner relationship, which has to go back to this thing. I just think that's more funny to me, and that's a more interesting surreal twist on Star Trek, I think, than this other thing. And it depends on where you want this show to go, I suppose, and whether or not you think that it needs to be more Star Trek or not. But I guess that's the difference.
Well, I really liked the Ascension thing at the end.
I like the end.
Yeah. I didn't love most of the stuff leading up to it because it was so flat and it was just the same scene over and over again, more or less.
The punchline elevates it, I think. Like, the punchline makes that seem better, but it's incredibly boring until you get to the punchline.
Yeah. Whereas I did find the other stuff pretty interesting. I did find the interactions between Mariner and Freeman, I thought, were a lot more interesting than the interactions between Tendi and this other guy. Yeah,
agreed.
It's tough because that is a really good. That's probably. I would say that's probably their best non-specific Star Trek joke they've done so far, is because it's not directly being referential to something else, but it is like it's referencing a trope, but it's not being referential to a specific thing.
The Ascension, the transformation you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, You're probably right. I think it's very strongly evocative of transfigurations in TNG, which is when an alien turns into a higher energy beam, and he's very happy about it at that point. But this, like, it's a similar effect. Like, he just turns into an energy person, and in this one, it's just horrifying. But I agree with you. It's not super specific in that it's no character stands there and says this is exactly like transfigurations from TNG or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I would put it in the same category as like the energy ball joke from the last one or the one before, where they make him use his energy to make a tricorder or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's in that same area where it's like it's a joke that feels specific to Star Trek, or should feel specific to Star Trek, but it's not. It's of the world more than it is of the brand, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I generally found this one to be the least funny out of all the episodes. I guess personal taste is everything there. I like the Ascension joke. Mariner and Freeman, I thought, were fairly good. I like the sort of mother badgering her type stuff. It's kind of reminiscent of like a Loxana and Deanna Troi relationship, I guess, once they start doing that. And the Boimler thing I thought was relatively kind of underwhelming. It's one of those episodes that, like, to bring it back to the whole different directions you could take each of the plot lines, I was kind of surprised that they weren't bursting with jokes for each of the setups that they had. Like, Mariner being part of the incredibly boring senior officer meetings and stuff, I feel that that's just really ripe for... I feel there's a lot of jokes to make in there, and they do things like incredibly redundant things, like it's like, come to ops for our ops schedule or something. Like, the joke is that it's just this kind of mindless and boring stuff that she has to go through every single day. But when she's in that,
I can see why she didn't want to leave, because what was it? Cleaning the carbon filter seems really relaxing. Just like using the phaser to just...
They could have given you a less exciting tool than a phaser to clean it. Like, if it was like a little toothbrush or something, they had to scrub it off. That makes more sense. The meeting with the senior officers, they're talking about ordering chairs or something. I was surprised that a comedy writing group couldn't come up with funnier dialogue between the senior officers as to what they were talking about. Sure. That's like incredibly boring. I feel that's right up the Office's alley, and I was expecting it, and it never came. What came instead was this sort of strange, unrealistic conversation where they were talking about a chair, right? That is like, it just felt too detached from reality. There's a way that, like, you can have them talking about like the incredibly mundane stuff that goes on the ship, and it feels a little bit more funny to me than this slightly deranged conversation they were having about like who's going to sit with a backless chair somewhere. Right. It's just stuff like that. I don't know if the show really wants to live in dialogue jokes and dialogue moments like that, and would rather maybe live off references. But I kind of wanted it in this episode. I hadn't felt that way about the previous ones.
Yeah, I feel like when you say The Office might have done that better, I immediately think of, I think it was the American Office anyway, the episode where Jim throws a party at his house. And so then you have a scene where Oscar and I think Kevin or maybe whoever it is are like intensely talking about paper stock at this party where people are just supposed to be having a good time.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of thing where it's like they're speaking intensely about the most mundane, boring shit that does not matter outside the walls of the office that they work in.
Right.
Yeah. And it's
the joke there is office workers only have their work to relate about, which is what always happens. At every corporate outing, everyone just talks about work because you don't know what everyone else is into.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like the chair thing, while I did chuckle at it a little bit, it's a very generic joke to make.
Yeah.
In those cases, yes, I think you could tune it up a little bit more and dial it in a little bit more to that would be a great place to just sling some technobabble.
Yes.
As just mindless have people having the doctor and what the hell's his name?
Shrax is the Shrax is the tactical guy. I don't know what the engineer's name is. Paul Scheer is what I call the engineer.
Yeah. But having those guys just like slinging minutia about something oscillating inhibitors or something like that, that could have been fun. But yeah, they do something a little bit more broad there, for better or worse.
Yeah, distractingly broad, just because I was actually kind of you don't want to be interested in what they're talking about, but he's talking about a somewhat like a semi-interesting thing about like he doesn't like those kind of chairs. So you as an audience member are going, would I like those kind of chairs? Like, is that an interesting point worth bringing up?
I identified immediately because I do not like bar stools. They make my back hurt immediately.
See, but it gives you a fiery opinion about something, and I don't think that's what they wanted in that case. I think the same kind of thing is the lack of anything really insightful or funny happening about the terraforming liquid on the ship. Like, it's just an Indiana Jones sequence where like sort of stuff is coming at you and they have to run down the hallways and get away from it and stuff. But I feel that you could do a whole episode about the ship becoming an organic thing. I just think there's so much in there that you could really mess around with, and they don't really make any jokes at all about it, which was strange. It's just they see a kind of an action generating sequence.
Yeah, it's I generally blame time for that, but also yes, they have so many different things going on that they don't really give a lot of time to the this organic thing.
Yeah.
But because I think if they had more time to do it, they could have spent more a little bit more energy on what it means. But I think that's also, I think, a weak spot of the show is when they, like I said earlier, when they do these ship-wide catastrophe things, they tend to run through them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Even the first one with the zombies or whatever, you get a couple jokes, but it's not really that much. It's more about fixing the problem than it is the jokes of the problem.
Yes.
And I think
I liked the zombie one. Oh, sorry. The zombie one was funny just because like the overreaction of the crew, like the violent overreaction to the zombies was inherently funny in that. And they don't really have that here. They can just kind of hurtle over trees that are popping up and stuff like that.
Yeah. They don't have a lot of reaction to this one. It's just Mariner and Freeman stuck in that hole. Excuse me. And Tendi and the other guy kind of running through whatever. Yeah, like you're right. It becomes kind of an action adventure sequence. And yeah, I don't know. I think that ultimately is a taste thing because I think I don't disagree with you. I think that they definitely could have done more with it, but I like the idea, and I'm kind of bummed that they didn't spend more time with it. But I like the idea being in the show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the one thing that's interesting
because it does the setup. The setup, specifics aside, it is a very Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
As far as interacting with the other captain, and they find this ship, and they accidentally cause this other thing to happen because the two of them are kind of butting heads, and then it all spreads to the ship, and they gotta say like it is a very Star Trek story.
What I liked was they must have been listening to our criticism last week, and they rewrote the episode in the week that it took to get this thing to air. But the other captain, the other captain is a more traditional Star Trek captain. I thought like he sees the Cerritos crew as kind of a joke and is like, what the hell is going on? Like, why don't we accomplish this? He's slightly exaggerated in that he competes with Freeman, and that's what causes this accident to happen to them. But I liked them bumping into another commander or another crew that are semi-serious and semi-Star Trek in the mold of Star Trek. And I think that that's a good pairing that should continue. I don't want everyone to be kind of wacky in this universe. I think it works better if there are some normal, quote-unquote, normal Star Trek captains.
I'm going back and forth on this in my head. How would you feel if it had been Freeman that caused the explosion as far as the other guy?
I would have preferred that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going that way too, because Freeman has a clear drive about her, and she's so dismissive of her daughter for going out of protocol, et cetera, that to have Freeman's drive to be the best, have her do something that causes this thing to happen, and then you can have a scene where when she and Mariner get into it, this comes up as being something that she caused. This the mom who is supposedly the one who has it all figured out,
right,
caused this explosion that could blow up both of these ships. And it also places the Cerritos as sort of like a top to bottom outcast ship a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where it's Freeman isn't just the hard nose. I mean, they're kind of doing this already, but it would show that Freeman is not just a hard nosed Starfleet captain. She's a overly hard nosed Starfleet captain where her decisions aren't always right.
Right.
And sometimes her hard nosedness and desire to be the best captain causes her to make a bad decision.
Yeah. It's funny. There's almost like an underlying theme of people with serious flaws feeling that they deserve to be with the elite, kind of like Freeman, I think, really shows that quite a bit, where I think Freeman is disappointed to be commanding the Cerritos, and she's always unhappy that they have to do these like bureaucratic secondary missions and stuff like that. But it's kind of neat to have just the entire crew have this like subconscious desire to be the top, but they all have these horrible flaws that kind of hold them back from doing that. But at the same time, desiring to be a part of that main Star Trek family and not quite being able to get there and be the misfit outcast ones.
Yeah, and I like that. And you don't have to draw a ton of attention to it, but if you make that part of your setup, is that these characters, like you said, they all want to be the best, but there's an inherent flaw stopping them from doing that. I think it makes for more well-rounded characters as well.
Yeah. I didn't dislike this one. I thought it was fine. I just thought it was the weakest out of all of them to this point. I don't really have anything else about that. I like the towing of the alien ship. I continue to think that sometimes the sci-fi plots that they're referencing are better than the execution that comes out of them in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I felt that here. Like, I really like the idea of this alien ship and towing it back. Even the setup felt like it was an angle that Star Trek has never taken, which is they acknowledge from the start that this is an ancient ship that for some reason everyone died on it, but they have all this stuff. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an Aliens reference in a lot of ways, like the disc jockey or these things that are just dead on it or whatever, and they find an alien life form. But it was neat, and I wish that they would do.
That's
stuff
a
with
much
that.
different movie, Wes. That's a much different movie when they go to the ship and they find a disc jockey.
It's
they go down and they open the egg, and then the pit bull is just staring back at them.
Gives me a Bud Light Lime.
Yeah, and black sunglasses just jump on your face.
Oh, I don't think he's not really around anymore. I don't think. WAP. Let's see. I guess that's a fitting reference for this moist vessel, I suppose.
That's true. Yeah.
Let's see. I guess we're done. Do you have anything else you want to say, or should we go to final thoughts?
No, I think that's about it. Yeah. I did want to say, I wonder if the negative response critically is in part due to the fact that they probably watched all 4 of these in one sitting.
Yes.
And
it's too much.
Yeah, they kind of hit similar story beats a few times in the first 4 episodes, which if you're watching them separately might not stand out or be bothersome as much. But like if you get to the 4th episode that you've watched in the last 2 hours, and you're going like, oh, it's another ship thing where the ship gets taken over. Well, this is the best they can, it
or just
it
the
all
energy
close together.
Yeah, like
the energy is pretty standard through all 4 of these.
It doesn't even have to be that. It could be like have you ever watched too many if you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, if you watch too many Curbs in a row, it negatively impacts the show, I think, because
really interesting.
Well, it's just so acerbic and like in some ways his comedy is predictable because you know something is going to go wrong with the situation that he's set up, but if you watch too many of them, I think it just negatively impacts the way that you perceive how he's responding to things. Like if he makes too many of the same kind of mistakes in a row, it seems unrealistic in some strange way. But if you take a break, you go, oh, a couple of months have passed in this character's life, and he makes a different mistake that's kind of similar to that one, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, you start to see the formula of the show a lot more, too.
Yeah.
Like, a year or so ago, I was watching *Halt and Catch Fire*, which I know a lot of people really like. And I watched like 2 seasons of it. And by the end, and I was just watching it straight through while I was working. And by the end of the second season, I could not have cared less, because every episode seemed to be the same thing, where it was like, these people are awful to each other. One of them does a really awful thing and has to deal with it. And then the one guy at the end gives some sort of like long-winded pie in the sky speech about technology that somehow fixes everything. It's just like, after 2 seasons, you're going like, hey, does everything have to be paced out the same way? It just,
right.
The repetition of the formula can do a number on you as well. So that might have been part of it. But I still maintain that after 4 episodes, I think the show's pretty good. It's I find it to be a very enjoyable half of television.
Yeah. I would be the same. I still, after 4 episodes, I think it's the best of this is the best of every new Trek, Kurtzman era Star Trek stuff that we've been given so far.
Totally.
Like in and of itself, I think it's the most consistent, and it makes the most sense, and it works the best.
It tells, say what you want about the characters or whatever, they tell the best stories. I mean, they tell the most Star Trek-y stories. Yeah. It's like I feel like hardcore Star Trek fans who have been asking for a more return to older form, it's sort of a monkey's paw situation for them, because this is the most traditionally structured of the new Star Trek shows, but the style is very much not of the old Star Trek shows. So it's interesting to look at it that way, as being a lot more faithful to the traditional structure, while also being not faithful at all as far as how the characters are portrayed and how Starfleet's portrayed. And if I mean
the heart.
It's difficult for me to I don't know how you watch this and get hung up about like protocol. Yeah. You know, I don't want to get into that stuff again. We kind of talked about that stuff last week a bit, but it's just, I mean, I find it to be a fun half-hour cartoon that takes place in the Star Trek world. Yeah. It's actually written pretty well.
Yes. I think it's I think nuts and bolts wise, it's got the best story structure out of everything that they've done to this point. Like, things pay off, things make sense, things end up in a place where it's like there's a beginning, middle, and end. You can clearly define what's happening. You could I'm
gonna make people really mad. I would argue that this is the best first season of Star Trek outside of TOS.
Good, yeah. It probably will be.
I look forward to your letters.
No, I wouldn't disagree. It's too bad we don't rate the new shows at this point, because it probably would end up there. It's funny because we're doing it with Enterprise now. It's consistent, but it's like the other side of the Enterprise angle, where Enterprise is like consistent and it's always slightly subpar in its first season. Lower Decks is consistent and it's slightly above par, or like what you would expect out of it. So that small difference probably does end up with booting it ahead into like a top tier first season. I guess that's it. Let's take a break. We'll play a clip from the episode. We'll come back and give our final thoughts, and then we'll call it a day.
Wow! Oh, no, what's happening?
Oh my gosh, you're ascending!
I am?
It must have been when you saved me, when you were willing to sacrifice yourself for me.
I pretended to be finding myself for so long, I guess I actually did. Okay, wow. Oh, that actually burns. Is this supposed to be happening?
Oh, okay, you're smoking?
It burns! Ow! I don't want to ascend! No!
Drop and roll! Drop back into the physical and roll! Drop back into the physical and roll!
I'm a slow beating! No, it's happening! I'm everywhere and nowhere! I can see everything! I'm turning into pure energy!
Why is it taking so long?
The Abraham Lincoln! The universe is balanced on the back of a giant koala! Why is he smiling? What does he know? The secret of life is...
Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile, as I mentioned at the top. Patreon.com/thepenskyfile. A couple dollars a month gets extra stuff.
How many patrons do you think we just lost by me saying this is the best first season of Star Trek?
We'll lock them in at annual memberships, and then they can't go. They'll
go.
just be forced to hear this stuff. Patreon.com/thepenskyfile is the best place to support the show. A couple dollars a month, you get extra stuff. There's extra podcasts. There's behind the scenes things. I did commentary videos. You get the polls to vote about what we do and what we cover. Patreon.com/thepenskyfile. And that's it. There's no patron thoughts here, but I will thank our patrons. The special captain tier. Special thank you goes to Christian Pouch, Tark Latif, Chris Tinsley, Mike Burnett, Cardinal Doomsday, Joint Mango, Ben Douglas, Neil Brennan, Kyle Barrett, Samuel Custer, Matt Ross, Nathan Elliott, Eric Johnson, Andrew Cherlog, Ben Grim Santo, Matt Cutler, Dwayne Hackett, Sean, Jordan Cooper, Derek Zajac, Russell Elledge, Kevin Reyes of All 13 Heroes, Stephen Minton, David Beermore, Darth Mosk, HH28, Matt Courier 6, Jacob 123, Matt Houston, Mike Harris, Mike Poindexter G, Nick Sergi, Jakey's Gamer, Patrick Seba, Captain Brazen, Kevin Lowry, Eric Sanchuan, Bradley Killens, Corey Martin, Rune Bendler, William Scheisler, Timothy Cooley. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. And we are here. I don't really have many final thoughts at this point. We talked about everything that has to happen with Lower Decks. There's no new announcements for the new episode titles or anything like that. The next one, I did like the concept of Boimler's girlfriend visits the ship. That seems potentially like there's something there. But yeah, outside of that, I guess my overall opinion of this is I sit in a place where I see the usual feedback of people praising it, which is a lot of my Star Trek Twitter feed. A lot of people going like, this is fantastic. And I kind of go like, yeah, this is not too bad. I see a lot of people working very hard to not like it at the same time. And I think that the thing there is just like, comedy is certainly subjective. And I can understand not thinking the show is particularly funny. I don't know. Like I see the usual Star Trek YouTube channels that are predetermined to hate this stuff, and they're working very hard to find reasons why they don't like this. And I just personally just kind of sit here in the middle, and I go, this is probably the best thing that they've done so far. And I wish it was, at the same time, I wish it was slightly funnier, which is going to come, I would assume, like once the writing room settles in and they know what works and what doesn't. That's really it. If I have like a flaw, if I have a flaw from this season of Lower Decks, it's just that sometimes I think that they don't seize the comedy correctly in some ways. Like that they're walking up to the joke and then they kind of step around it instead of going head on into it and to see what happens. And I hope that changes, and I hope that they develop that a little bit more as their sensibility develops.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's probably much better for me anyway. It's much better than I expected it to be. And yeah, I think as they kind of settle into what the show's about and what they're trying to do, they'll get a little bit more out of it.
More Rutherford, more Tendi.
Because it's
that's my recommendation too.
I feel like oddly enough, animated shows. Well, no, that's not true. I was gonna say animated shows tend to be better out of the gate than live action shows for some reason. I don't know if it's because they have longer times to refine their jokes and their scripts or whatnot. But that certainly wasn't true of The Simpsons. But so.
It got there quick though. Got there quick anyway.
It did, yes.
Yeah. Animation happens much faster than The Simpsons did. Obviously now they can get through this stuff much more quickly. Yeah, no, I guess that's pretty much it. I don't know what the next episode is for this one. I thought this was my least favorite episode out of all 4 of them so far, but it still seemed fine. Didn't bother me tremendously. And I guess that's pretty much it. Do you have anything final thoughts about that one, Clay, or are we done?
I think we're good to go.
We're done. Guys, thank you very much for listening. That was Moist Vessel. Can we do, I guess
it's a funny title. Every time you say it, I chuckle, so I can understand it.
Cut these giggles out. The vessel thing is about the ascension, right? Like you, the religious terminology is always you are a vessel for something. Is the moistness just from the water that comes on the ship? Is that like what else is moist?
Yeah, I don't know. Now, I think we're moving into one of those other YouTube channels if we're breaking down what exactly was moist. Is
it just the emulsion? Is an emulsion by definition moist? Emulsion. Let me see. Emulsion definition: a suspension of globules in one liquid in a second liquid. Okay, so maybe that's what it is, I suppose.
Sure.
Emulsion. all those smoothies and everything like that are a special emulsion. All right, cool. Well, we're done with that. Moist Vessel is the episode. We both kind of liked it, although I didn't like it quite as much. And that's it. We're done with it. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.